Hello, and welcome to the Less is More Education podcast with your host, Steve Flores, where I review the research that is most relevant to pedagogy and education policy to help teachers on their ongoing learning. So, every year, the University of Michigan Institute for Social Research releases an annual review of psychological research on a variety of topics. In 2002, Jacquelynne Eccles and Allan Wigfield wrote a chapter on motivational beliefs, values, and goals, which summarizes the latest research on the topic of motivation. The following is just part one of the summary of the theoretical basis for motivation, focusing on implications for educators. So this is a huge, paper that had a lot of different parts to it, and I'm just going to be covering two main aspects right now. The first one being what are theories focused on expectancy, and what are theories focused on reasons for engagement, right? So you can think of motivation as having two different parts, can I and why? Why should I? All right, so theories focused on expectancy assume motivation comes from an expectation for a positive outcome, or to avoid a negative one. So at the heart of the question, the focusing question then becomes, can I do this task? And if the answer is yes, then that means that there's a higher likelihood for the subject to be motivated. And the first of these beliefs or theories is going to be Albert Bandura's self-efficacy theory. So self-efficacy is the belief that one can perform a specific task. It's important to note that this self-efficacy is really, really task-specific, right? So, for example, I have a lot of self-efficacy in the belief because I believe that I can carry my children up the stairs. But I do not have the same amount of self-efficacy if I had to instead carry both my brothers up the stairs, right? So those are two very different scenarios. I know what I'm good at, I know what I'm not good at, or I know where my limit is. So that's where self-efficacy kind of comes into play. Now, in self-efficacy, you can think of it as having three different dimensions. The first one is strength, generality, and difficulty. So if you think about what strength is more like conviction. Like, how much do you believe that you can do a certain task? So it's like the difference between I think I can make a grilled cheese versus I know I can make a grilled cheese. Next is generality. So generality is just, do you believe you can do many things within a domain or just a few things within a domain? So that's the difference between I can cook an egg versus I can make eggs scrambled, I can hard boil them, I can make a quiche, right? So there's a generality that's there. The next one is going to be difficulty. So that's your belief in being able to do tasks even when they become difficult. So that's the difference between I might need a recipe to hard boil an egg versus I can hard boil an egg using just my feet blindfolded, right? So there's a difficulty-ness to this. And so when you think about expectations, everyone's going to fall in a certain part of each of these dimensions. If you can answer all three of them in the positive, then you have what's called really high amounts of self-efficacy, right? So you feel strongly about a lot of things and that you feel confident on being able to do a wide variety of things, and you believe that you can do very difficult things. So that is, so Bandura is also careful to point out that efficacy expectations are different from outcome expectations. So outcome expectations is whether or not you believe something can even happen at all. So efficacy is just whether or not you believe you can do a certain thing. So those two things are very different. So beyond Bandura, there's also all these other theories on expectancy that are more focused around the idea of control. And this is where the idea of locus of control comes into play, which is an idea that was developed by Julian Rotter. So locus of control just differs from efficacy because it focuses more on whether or not you can control certain outcomes versus your ability to do an outcome. So if you have an internal locus of control, then you expect greater amounts of success. So in a way, it's kind of like it leads to an expectancy, right? Having an internal versus an external locus of control. So internal locus of control is you're in control of successes and failures. External locus of control means like the environment or something outside of you is responsible for successes and failures. In order for you to have a lot of self-efficacy, you have to believe that everything you do is what causes a failure or a success. And notice that it's not really so much important that you believe that only just the successes are important. The failures are also equally important, right? And some people believe that understanding that you're the reason for your own failures might be even more important than you're the reason for your own successes. Because if you know why you're failing, then you can make a plan to change your behavior. So having an external locus of control would be like boxing blindfolded, right? Boxing blindfolded is super demoralizing because if you manage to land a hit, that's just luck, right? And you're not even going to know why you're yourself getting hit. Removing the blindfold is what puts the locus of control within you. Now, at the very least, if you miss, you know why. Now, if you land a hit, you know why. And you also know why you're getting hit. So those allow you, all that information allows you to modify your behavior so that you can increase your chances for success. If everything is just luck, then you're just going to be demoralized. So that's the locus of control. Locus of control is also connected to another idea that was developed by two researchers by the names of James Connell and James Wellborn. And what they did is they took a look at all of the locus of control research and then summed it up into 3 psychological needs. And these needs, they just come up over and over and over again in all these different books that I read. And some of them are implied in other books like in their chapter headings. Like it's pretty wild how often this comes up. And so I found that their research was very, very useful. So your psychological needs these are just the needs that you need in order to be able to be efficacious is you need to have a sense of competence, a sense of autonomy, and a sense of relatedness. So let's start off with competence. Competence just basically refers to the idea that every time you attempt to do something, all the things that you're attempting to do are just above what your current ability level is, right? So, you master adding by 1s and 2s. Now you're going to master adding by 1s, 2s, and 3s. So because that next one is just a little bit above where you're comfortable at, it makes it easy for you to make that jump, experience a success, and now you just got to move the goalpost a little bit higher and then achieve that and move it a little bit higher. And if you keep doing that, then you have a strong sense of competence, right? Because you start to believe, all right, I can achieve things, and I can achieve things that are in progressively harder and harder and harder and harder things to do. A sense of autonomy means that you're in control, right? So you have the control and you are making the decisions. So this is kind of the same thing as having an internal locus of control. What you do matters. That's autonomy, right? And you have choices. And you cannot have autonomy unless you have choices. And this is going to have serious implications for teachers and students. If you want your students to be autonomous, you have to be able to give them plenty of choices, right? Because autonomy means my choices matter. So there has to be that element of choices. And finally is going to be relatedness. And that comes a lot of the research of, well, if you feel like you're teacher is warm and caring, cares about you, you make a connection, a personal connection with your teacher, then that is essential to motivation, right? Now, you don't have to necessarily have all three in equal amounts. You might have a focus of more of one than the other, but all three are important for motivation. And the more you maximize those three things in your classroom, the more motivated your students are going to be, right? And honestly, you should apply this to yourself as well as a teacher. And you got to start asking yourself, well, how much competence do you have in your life? Are you constantly trying to improve your practice? Or not, maybe not just your practice, but do you have a hobby, something that you're constantly working towards getting better? And then you can think about it in terms of autonomy, right? How much choice do you have in your classroom? As time goes on, there's probably going to be less and less of that, especially in the state of California. And finally, how related are you? Now, you may be really excellent at creating relationships with your students, and that's great and all, but if you want to improve as a teacher, if you want to be better, then you have to increase that relatedness with other teachers. And that is very difficult to do within a school day, right? Because there's very little time, and I keep bringing this up. American teachers on average spend 27 hours a week in front of their students. The average for the OECD countries is 19. And some places, some jurisdictions that have really excellent international test scores, like Singapore, they only spend 17 hours a week in front of their students. All the other time is cooperating with colleagues, collaborating to create lesson plans, to look at grading, to talk about the needs of their students. And that relationship builds up cohesion, relatedness between each of the teachers. And so that is a huge piece that's missing because that is embedded weekly. They do that. There's dedicated time for that every single week, and for some places, daily. And that's where you get to see the best teachers. Okay. So there's Connell and Wellborn. Next is Ellen Skinner. Ellen Skinner basically created a model of perceived control that has three different components. There are means ends, control beliefs, and agency beliefs. So the way to think about it is like it's the answer to these questions. So means end is, does A lead to B, right? Control beliefs is, can I control it? Can I have an effect on this thing? And finally, agency beliefs is, can I make it happen? So if the answer is yes to all three of those questions, then you can start to feel a sense of autonomy, right? Now you have options here. Now you can take charge. All right, so that's one set of ideas. Let's take a look at the next set of ideas, which are theories focused on reasons for engagement. So why is at the heart of these set of theories. And we're going to start off with with three basic theories. So these can be broken up into intrinsic motivation theories, into interest theories, and goal theories. All of them care about the question, why? All right. So there's also an emphasis on, well, why should I? Right? And so think about how you're answering that question for your students in your classroom. So let's start off with the first set of theories, which is intrinsic motivation. Now, intrinsic motivation are like pretty various. There's actually a lot of different kinds of intrinsic motivation theories. And they start off with probably one that you learned in your teaching credential program by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, and this is called self-determination theory. I know as a part of my program, that was really pushed, onto us. And it has two basic pillars. The first one is humans are motivated to maintain an optimal level of stimulation, and humans have basic needs for motivation, for competence, and personal causation, or in other words, self-determination, right? So both of those things I find are pretty true, but I feel like there's a lot missing in that. So when you talk about a basic need to be stimulated, yes, like if you like being bored is kind of being bored in itself is not motivating, but it can lead to motivation through creativity, and that's a whole nother topic of conversation. All right, so Deci and Ryan essentially believe that intrinsic motivation could be found at the crossroads between competence and self-determination. So you need to know that you can, and you got to have like the willpower to do that. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about willpower in the next episode when we start talking about volition. And there's a big difference between motivation and volition, right? Believing whether or not you can do something versus having the willpower to carry it out. There's a huge difference there. But they believe, all right, competence and self-determination. If you have both those things, then you're going to be motivated. So they also connected in this in a weird, like through like a weird subway to relatedness. And one of the ways that they put it is they put there's intrinsic motivators, right? So things that you like to do for the sake of doing them. There's extrinsic motivators, so things that you have to do because other forces are pushing you in that direction. And they come up with this idea that, all right, because social pressure, peer pressure, like actually winds up changing people's goals, then there's a way of taking extrinsic motivators and turning them into intrinsic motivators through a process that's called internalization. So if you internalize something that whatever that thing was, it wasn't in you to begin with, right? So that's like the consequences of peer pressure, and that's why having a school-wide culture of learning is so important. If you have a school-wide culture of learning, then the peer pressure comes towards like your grades and doing well. But that also kind of goes counter to like what teenagers are trying to do. Teenagers are trying to minimize their effort and maximize their success. So, there's a lot of like forces at play here. All right. So within these theories, there's also this idea of flow. If you read any books on psychology, any books, you're going to hear this name, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Now, the way it's spelled is nothing like that, because this guy, I think he's like Hungarian. But he writes about this idea called flow. And flow is the state that you get into where you're working on something and you lose track of yourself, you lose track of time, like the day seems to like go by really, really quickly. I remember when I first adopted my dogs, this was about 7 years ago. I decided, all right, I'm going to build them a doghouse. I love working with my hands. I'm going to build them a nice doghouse. So I learned roofing. So I learned how to put down shingles and waterproofing. I learned how to put insulation. I learned how to build the doghouse itself. I learned how to put in flooring. And each day I was working from like 8 o'clock in the morning to 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. But it would feel like, only an hour has passed by, or maybe 2 hours have passed by. That's because I got really involved in this. And that is flow. And many people have experienced that. So Mihai Csikszentmihalyi basically says that this state is characterized by a holistic feeling of being immersed in and carried by an activity. So that's losing yourself in it. Merging of action and awareness. Focused attention on a limited stimulus field. So you're only focusing on a few things at a time. Lack of self-consciousness and feeling in control of one's actions and the environment. And so again, you're bringing in that idea of locus of control. You're in control of everything that's happening. So it's a state of unmitigated motivation. And so this is a state versus a general, like, being pushed towards something. And that's an important distinction between like intrinsic motivation theory and flow, right? One's a state and one's like an ongoing process. Okay. So one of the interesting connections that was made in flow is if you look at kids, kids are constantly going into a state of flow through play. Play is going to be a big part of motivation, right? You like if you look at kids, you don't have to prompt them to play. They just go and start playing automatically. And once they start playing and they get really involved, you see them enter into that state of flow very, very quickly. They set up some rules, they play a game, and they're away they go. Now, because play and flow are intimately connected, there must be a reason for that. And a lot of people seem to believe that the reason for play and flow being connected is that while you're playing, you're actually learning a lot of skills. Now, some of them are social skills, pro-social skills, and some of them are physical skills, and those are necessary for survival. That's why those two things tend to go hand in hand, and we're going to talk about later on about how to incorporate this into our classrooms. Okay, next is going to be individual differences theories of intrinsic motivation, and what this is more of like a personality trait. Right? So individual differences and interest theories, they more talk about like the trait of being motivated towards something. Now, you can see this if you ever see a student that's like really into sports. That's all they can really think about. That's all they relate everything to it. They play it every day. They go to practice. Maybe they mess around with something while they're not even in practice. So for instance, I had a student that was really into soccer, so he would like walk around with the soccer ball, kicking it everywhere all the time. I had a lot of students that were musical, right? So they would walk around carrying guitars, and then they like during their breaks, sometimes in class, they would play their guitars and just strum and just play around with it. And that seems to be like a character specific trait. And so the idea is that some people feel this more strongly than other people, and that's what kind of creates like grit in people, right? And so it might be more of a grit type thing. So Kobe Bryant might have just been born with a set of genes that propelled him to be really interested in basketball and really focus on basketball. And so, but not everyone is born with those traits. So that's something to keep in mind. So these theories aren't super helpful when it comes to applications. So I'm going to, move on from these and jump into goal theories. Now, there's a ton of goal theories, and the way that they're different is in how they classify a bunch of different goals. Now, you might have experience with goals in that, and you might see it if you go to the gym pretty often, like let's say you're a regular gym goer, you're going to notice this. You're going to notice that in January, all of a sudden, all these people show up at the gym that weren't there before, right? And then usually by February, March, all those people disappear again, and then they come out of hibernation the next January. Now, that happens because of the difference in what are called ego-involved goals versus task-involved goals or task-related goals. Now, an ego-involved goal is basically a goal that you have that is, it's about your ego, right? You commit yourself to doing something because you want to look cool, or you want to obtain some kind of an object or achieve something, right? So those are ego-involved goals. A task-related goal is setting up a goal so that you want to do something for the sake of doing that thing. And if you have a hobby, that's a task-related goal. So my hobby is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I go, and my only goal is just, all right, I need to get a little bit better than I was the last time. So that's a task-related goal. Now, one of those is going to keep you motivated long-term, and the other one is only going to keep you in the gym in January, right? So what we want to do is we want to encourage this task-related goals, or create task-related goals for our students so that they're more involved in the learning for the sake of learning rather than trying to achieve something like a grade or entry into a college. All right. The other ways goal theories classify goals is you can also have performance approach and performance avoid goals. So performance approach is basically you're trying to go do something, right? Performance avoid is you're trying to avoid something, usually because you don't want to look dumb. Sorry for that. Okay. So performance avoid, don't want to look dumb. So that's what happens when students don't want to answer a question because they're afraid of looking dumb. All right. So they have set up a goal, a really brief one, of I'm not going to answer this so that people don't know how dumb I really am, which is unfortunate for students to have that. There's also goals that are like within person goals versus person environment. So within person could be like happiness as a goal, exploration as a goal, transcendence as a goal. Person environment has more to do with the person and the environment. So that's self-determination, social responsibility, material gain, safety. Where I found the rubber hits the road is mostly in what are called pro-social and academic goals. And I like these because pro-social goals have more to do with following through on promises and social responsibility and developing a relationship between the teacher and you and your teacher, right? And academic goals are more of like wanting to learn things. And it could be wanting to learn things for the sake of learning them versus wanting to learn things just to get them done, right? It doesn't matter. Both of those are classified as academic goals. But what they found is that if a student only has pro-social goals, then they're really popular with their peers, with fellow students, but their academic success is pretty low. If a student has just academic goals, then they are kind of seen as a suck up to all the other students. And so they wind up sacrificing their sociability. And then also their academic success is limited. So it's like, dang, that sucks. What they found was the kids that consistently showed academic success had a mixture of pro-social and academic goals. So if you're ever talking with your students about goals, you got to make sure that you include both of those or opportunities for both of those. Not just like what is your goal for me in this class, but what's your goal for you and the people around you, right? Having a mixture of those is going to be important. So let's talk about how we can incorporate these things into our classroom. So let me sum up kind of what we have so far. So the first set of questions is, can I, right? So we have Bandura's self-efficacy theory, which teaches us that students must have positive expectations in order to achieve. One of the things that he writes is high personal academic expectations predict subsequent performance, course enrollment, and occupational aspirations choice, right? Or aspirations and choice. I guess it's aspirational choices. But basically, if you have a lot of positive expectations, you're going to succeed. It's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The control theories tell us that there's some basic psychological needs that we all have. And you can put them in these categories of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And even when you look at self-determination theory maps like exactly on that. And so the question then becomes, all right, how do I give students a sense of self-efficacy while also giving them a sense of autonomy, competence, and relatedness? And there is no clean answer to this question. That's because self-efficacy is very task-specific, and that's also because your students are going to range in what they even want to accomplish or what their interests are. So this is going to be pretty difficult to answer. But what you can do is you can use the question to kind of help you evaluate what's going on in your classroom. So a sense of self-efficacy cannot be instilled unless students are drawing a line between their actions, and their successes and failures. If they feel like they're doing things and then getting random results, right? Sometimes I pass, sometimes I don't. Then that demoralizes them, and then that reduces their motivation. But if you're constantly showing them like, oh, hey, you applied this particular technique and you got this result, it doesn't matter that the result is a success or a failure. Just drawing that connection between action and success or failure is what's going to help them develop a sense of self-efficacy, right? And then they'll be doing, all right, here's what I should be doing and why I should be doing these things. And so what that means practically is students need lots of time to practice problems and then get immediate feedback. So if they practice something, they try out some questions, and then they can see the answer right away, then they can draw connections of like, oh, this time I tried to do the technique, it worked, right? Or and that's why teaching skills is so important, right? Because if you don't teach them the skills, if you just say like just try it, then they're going to try some things, and sometimes it's going to be successful, and sometimes it's going to lead to failure, and it's just going to feel random to them. So you want to make sure that you show a technique and then have them practice it immediately after so they can get that. The other thing is, while they're doing these practicing sessions, you cannot make it punitive on them, because punitive, like punishments, while you're practicing, takes the focus off of learning for the sake of learning, and then it puts it on learning to achieve some kind of a goal, right? And that kind of learning just doesn't, it's less sticky, right? Kids don't feel like they're absorbing that much information. And autonomy can't be given unless the students have choices. So we talked about that earlier. So giving them lots of choices. Competence comes from constantly reaching towards a goal that's constantly moving, but you're feeling that sense of success each time you move the goalpost. And then relatedness can't be achieved unless you have a relationship somehow between you and the student, and even better, be among the students themselves. So in our classrooms, you can think of it as the first beginning part of your school year, you should just focus on building rapport with your students to develop that sense of relationship, or those relationships. And that's because the relationships take really a lot of time to solidify and take hold. The how close you feel to somebody is like how much time you spend with them in honest conversation. If you have trouble trying to develop these relationships, Kagan is a company, they're not sponsoring us, that I found had a lot of activities that help you build relationships, particularly between students, and some of them between you and the students if you participate in those strategies. So Kagan, really good for building a sense of relatedness. Students must be taught skills to attain knowledge. So even though we as teachers are content experts, I think we should start switching the focus from us giving them information to us being more of coaches or mentors. And that's because information now is everywhere. Like, think about anything that you can teach in a class. They can get that information off the internet, like all of it, right? So our duty then is going to shift from being like the arbiters of information to like, hey, I'm going to show you how to get information. So what's the difference between good information and bad information? So how to vet information, what's relevant and what's not relevant. And then what our job is going to be then is to teach them the skills to do those on their own. And you can incorporate a librarian if you want. Librarians are really good at vetting information as well. So this gives you a reason to actually talk to your librarian. And so if you can give them into small groups and then like try to adjust your coaching to the needs of certain groups, so you can group kids by whatever need that they have at the time. So maybe like a set is struggling on vocabulary, or there's a set is struggling on understanding some concept. Then you can pull them aside and have like a little mini lesson, and then you can kind of show them different ways of seeing one piece of information. But that's the majority of the information is coming from them and them applying the techniques that you teach them in order to absorb the information. So if you think about how to get information, a lot of information is out there, but it's via text, right? So how do you extract information via text? If you look at Avid has Wicker, and it's really focused on a lot of textual information. They show you how to break down a chapter in a book, right? Like, how do you know what information is important? How do you know what information is not important? How do you create questions out of the headers so that you're focusing on what's important in the chapters and you're discovering those things as you go along? And then how do you write that stuff down so that you can remember it? So if you have an Avid coordinator or an Avid class, talking to them about those structures and then trying to make those school-wide would really help out your students. So again, Avid's not a sponsor, but if they want to be, I'm down. All right. And next, they need to be able to connect ideas to themselves, right? Or to some piece of information that they already have in their heads. And that's where graphic organizers come into play. So graphic organizers, if they start off or at least have some element where they write down things that they already know and then start to draw connections between what they already know and some new piece of information, then I think graphic organizers are pretty useful. But a lot of the time, we just tell students to just pick one of these graphic organizers and organize these ideas. That's not really helpful to them. You have to connect those ideas to something that's already in their heads for it to be useful and for it to stick into their long-term memory. All right. Now, another way that you can be helpful to your students is you can constantly assess them. And this could be formally, it could be informally, but constantly getting them to know, like, all right, where am I in this? How am I understanding this? Like, where am I? A lot of teachers, or a lot of techniques that I've been reading about lately that seem to be successful with students in pushing students to like take ownership is there's this idea now that you should do your lesson planning with the students. And I thought this was like a pretty interesting idea. And the way it starts off is you can start off by presenting the students with the information that you want them to learn. Now, for us, because everything is standards-based, you could literally just print out the standards and go like, all right, in this unit, we have these standards, right? And you can even break those up into smaller, more manageable pieces if you want. And then you can say like, all right, these 4 standards, we're going to try to master these 4 standards, and we have a week or 2 weeks to do it, okay? Now, here's 3 different ways that we can do this. Or the way we're going to do this is we're going to start backwards. First, I want you guys to think up of how you want to show me that you know this information. Now, that could be through taking a test, through making a presentation, or doing some kind of other project. Now that they have the end in mind, then you can start going into the material or the standards, and you can start having them break it down into like what questions and why questions. So what questions would be like vocabulary questions, like, oh, what is polar? Or what is the Constitution? Or what are the Bill of Rights? Easy, right? And those are really important questions. And then you can help them come up with why questions. And that way you have a mixture of low-level and high-level questions. So for those kids that are having struggle, you can always connect why to like something that's relevant to them, right? So why should I know the Bill of Rights? Why, or even how questions are important, right? how are polar molecules important to me, right? In my classroom or in my house. And then if you can build up those why questions, and let's say they want to take a test, those questions could be their test, right? And say like, all right, you're going to know if you understand this, if you can answer however many of these questions, right? And if you feel like you want to like insert yourself into it, maybe stick to like a 20% rule. Maybe you can come up with an agreement with them of like, all right, you're going to come up with 80% of the questions. I'll come up with 20%. So at least they feel like they're mostly in control, right? And then you can give them all of that information in the beginning and go like, look, this is what we have to master. And what I'm going to do is periodically, like at the end of every day, I'll give you like 5 of these questions and we'll see how many of them you can answer. And if the kids actually work and try it and they'll see like, the first day I answered 20% of these questions, right? So I answered 2 out of 10 of these questions. The next day I answered 4. The next day I answered 8. Then that gives them this responsibility of like, oh, I'm doing this. The locus of control is within me, right? And that's very powerful to students because that gives them a sense of self-efficacy, which is really important for them to succeed and to even just be motivated. And you know what? We should also have honest conversations with our students about, well, what's your goal for this class, right? Are you taking this class because you have to? Or are you taking this class because you want to learn something? And their answer, and it should be okay for them to answer whichever question. Because the fact of the matter is, we don't give students a ton of choice in what classes they take, even at the high school level, right? And sometimes even at the college level. So if a student's idea is just like, well, I just need to pass this class. I just need a C, right? Then their goal should be like reaching a 75% on their quizzes. And if they hit 75% consistently, then you'll be like, okay, dude, good. If you want to like try to get better than that, you can if you want. If you want to like just hang out and chill out or help other students in here, you can do that as well, right? And that would help me out. And this way, students will feel like they're being respected, right? Like they're being seen, like as like, oh, okay, like my opinion is like matters here. And that also helps build up that sense of relatedness, right? And if your sense of relatedness becomes stronger, you'll see that they naturally will want to, to try and please you, they'll want to try harder and harder. And you can do that same process with a project or a presentation, right? And, give them ownership of lesson planning, which is pretty cool. That'll free up some work for you. All right. Now let's look at the other end of the question, which is the why question. And the why question is one of the things that I noticed is that the self-determination theory and the Connell and Wellborn theory or psychological needs are basically the same thing. You need to feel competent. You need to feel autonomy. You need to feel related. The only difference between them really was that in Deci and Ryan's self-determination theory, they added this idea that peer culture really influences your goals essentially, or what you want to accomplish. So if you can set up a culture of learning in your classroom, or even better if it would be in your school, then that puts the pressure a little bit more on the academic side, and it makes it easier for you. So that's really the only difference. Flow states just basically teach us the importance of play. And play is so important, right? Especially at the primary levels. So like in elementary school, and even to a certain extent in middle school, that like countries like Finland, their school day is like about 44% of their school day is free time for the kids to play, and even for the teachers to play really with each other, right? Which is like, sounds weird, but it's more of like, hey, let's have coffee. Let's talk about our lesson plans. I'm struggling with this student. What can we do? Because that's kind of like teacher play, right? And, they boast great test scores and they're the happiest country. So I don't think those two things are connected, are separate from each other. Everybody tells me like, oh, well, the reason why they do successfully is because they're happy. I'm like, well, it's a two-way road, man, right? Like the structures build up capacity for happiness, and then the happiness creates better structures. So I don't see why we can't do the same thing or have the same targets here. Like why we can't make teaching about seeing students holistically, and caring and doing the things necessary to support their mental health on top of their academic health. And countries like Finland show us that it is possible, right? And it might have to include re-envisioning how the school day looks like, because play is that important. And states of flow are really important to play, right? Or really explanatory in terms of what play is. So as much as you can, include play. Now, while we're on the idea of play, I think it's important to look at Peter Gray, who basically did a bunch of work on play, and understand like, well, what is play? So Peter Gray has these characteristics of play, and that is play is self-chosen and self-directed. Play is an activity in which means are more valuable than ends. Play has structure or rules that are not dictated by necessity, but emanates from the minds of the players. Play is imaginative, non-literal, or removed from real life, and involves an active, alert, non-stressed frame of mind. That's basically the flow state. And elements of this you can't do all of those things in your classrooms, right? Unless you just decide to abandon your curriculum. But what you can do is you can take elements of that and incorporate it into your class. So I wrote a miniature flow of a lesson here to kind of illustrate the idea and to kind of show how we can promote intrinsic motivation. So this is a lesson on forces at a distance, which is a big topic in physics. And what we could do is we could start off by giving small groups or pairs of students a variety of magnets, paper, and paper clips, and asking them to either ask two discovery questions, so questions about how magnets work, or I can give them a set of questions and say, pick two of these. Now, it's important to give them both of those things, right? You can ask the questions or you can pick from these because that gives them ownership of what they're doing or what they're trying to discover. And then you can tell them, all right, here's what you need to do. I want you to come up with answers to those questions, but the only caveat is you have to justify your answers with data that you collect, right? And you can give them rulers too. I just thought rulers are going to be important in this because that's where you're going to get data from. And yeah, maybe force springs as well. All right, so next, students have to either put their data and conclusion into a template that you give them for a presentation, or you can have them decide how they're going to present the information, right? Do they want to do a picture? Do they want to do a speech? Do they want to write down a little essay in claim evidence reasoning format? What is it how is it that they're going to present the information? And again, you're including that choice. And because the choice is there, and because it's differentiated, students that are more extrinsically motivated are going to be more likely to pick the template and pick from two of the questions that are provided. Students that are more intrinsically motivated are going to be more likely to come up with their own way of displaying their information and creating their own questions to answer. Then it works out best for everyone there. And to prevent boredom, you could, at the end, because nobody likes sitting through and watching a bunch of the same types of presentations, you can do a gallery walk and have students walk around and give feedback on Post-its to each of the presentations that they see, and just show them how to do it constructively, right? So it includes a problem and a way of fixing the problem. And And then it's important to allow students to be able to use that feedback to modify their presentations so that they feel like, all right, this isn't the end all be all. I can always make this a little bit better. And the nice part about this is this does not have to be graded, right? Like if you set up your classroom as having a culture of learning for the sake of learning, not everything has to be graded, right? Maybe only the important things have to be graded. And so this is a good way of also putting the focus on learning for the sake of learning, okay? And so this has elements like making means more valuable than the ends, right? Because we're not focused on some grade at the end. We're focused on more just learning for the sake of learning. And because there's a lot of choice and there's a lot of self-directed opportunities, you have elements of play in your lesson. And you also have a lot of like competence opportunities here, right? Students that don't feel confident in asking questions can pick from questions, and they can still go through the work of trying to answer them, trying to come up with ways of answering them that put the self-efficacy into them, right? Again, you're shifting the locus of control right onto them. And starting with the questions with starting a lesson with questions also helps makes things like comprehensible to the students, right? So students aren't going to answer a question that they can't even comprehend. They're going to pick something that they understand and go like, oh, okay, I think I have an idea as to what that is, and I'm going to try to answer that question. And so finally, how I want to end this is if you conceptualize motivation as having two basic components, can I and why, then you can start to frame lessons in the format of I can because. So here's a couple of examples. I can do simple arithmetic because I can estimate the cost of groceries at a market. I can understand electromagnetism because I can explain how an electric car creates motion. Notice that like the can I portion of each statement is essentially just the content that you want them to get, and the why it adds some sort of relevance to the students. And if you can make that why portion more and more relevant to them, then your lessons become more and more motivating, right? So including your students into the lesson planning and how they want to study things is really powerful and can make them more motivated students. So this has been part one of my talk on motivational beliefs, values, and goals. Next week, I'm going to go over part two. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. To support the podcast, like and subscribe, tell your friends, tell teachers. You can email me if you have any questions or topics that you want me to cover, or even papers. I love reading academic papers that you want to send me at lessismore.education@skiff.com. You can find me on Instagram and YouTube at lessismore.education. On Twitter, lessismore, EDUC, and the number 1. If you want to support me to support me, all you have to do is just buy me one coffee a month. You could do that at patreon.com/lessismoreeducation. If you prefer reading things, I take all of these episodes and I write them down and I post them online at lessismoreeducation.substack.com. And I hope you enjoyed the podcast and I hope you found it useful. Again, like and subscribe. Thank you very much.